The senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, I want to compliment the senator from Oklahoma for his great work on this legislation. He's been a fierce advocate for transportation funding, for doing highway bills on more than a short-term basis. As he's mentioned numerous times, since 2009, we've had 33 short-term extensions, patches, if you will, which really makes it very, very difficult to run a highway program. And Senator from Oklahoma has been as I said, fierce and persistent advocate that one of the responsibilities that we have around here is to make sure that we are building the infrastructure in this country that keeps our economy competitive, that allows people and freight to move in an efficient way, and to ensure that our economy is strong and vibrant. Because I can tell you, as someone who represents a rural state in the middle of the country, that if it weren't for the supply chain that we have between our highways and bridges, our railroads, our ports, all of those things are critically important for us to get our products, the things that we raise and grow in South Dakota, to the marketplace. And agriculture is our #1 industry. It drives our economy, and it's incredibly dependent upon transportation. And so a strong, vibrant, robust economy depends upon transportation. And obviously, you want to have a system that's safe. And that's one of the issues that I want to speak to with regard to this bill as well. But I appreciate the great work that Senator Inhofe and his team, working with Senator Boxer, have done on this bill. We're going to continue to debate this. I hope we can bring it to a close. As the senator from Oklahoma pointed out, if we did that, we would have an opportunity to at least put it before the House and give them a chance to act on it, whether they choose to or not. I would certainly hope that the House of Representatives would take a hard look at this bill and consider taking it up and moving it, because there's been a lot of work that's gone into it. We have a deadline ahead of us, and if we don't do this, we're going to be stuck with yet another 34th short-term extension, just kicking the can down the road and making it more difficult for those who are in the position of having to make decisions about planning and designing our infrastructure in this country to do that. And obviously a lot of people who depend, a lot of jobs who depend upon the decisions that come out of Washington with regard to this bill. And so I would too encourage our colleagues here in the Senate to move as quickly as we can to complete action on the bill here, and to allow the House of Representatives to take a chance at considering it and perhaps getting this issue resolved, a long-term bill in place. These bills are nothing new in the Senate, Mr. President. The bill before us today is notable because it is the first transportation bill, as I've mentioned, in almost a decade to provide more than 2 years of funding for our nation's infrastructure needs. Since 2009, Congress has passed more than 33 short-term funding extensions. That's an average of approximately 5 funding extensions a year. Well, that's not a good way to manage our nation's infrastructure, and it wastes an incredible amount of money. Around the country, hundreds of thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of jobs depend on funding contained in transportation bills. And when Congress fails to provide the necessary certainty about the way transportation funding is going to be allocated, states and local governments are left without the certainty that they need to authorize projects to make long-term plans for transportation infrastructure. And that means that essential construction projects get deferred, necessary repairs may not get made, and the jobs that depend on transportation are put in jeopardy. My home state of South Dakota has been forced to defer important construction projects thanks to the lack of funding certainty. Mr. President, no individual or business would start building a house or an office building if it could only promise a contractor 3 months of funding. In the same way, Congress can't expect a state to begin construction of a new bridge or highway without the certainty that the project is going to be fully funded. The highway bill before us today, the DRIVE Act, reauthorizes transportation programs for 6 years and provides 3 years of guaranteed funding. And all 3 years of funding have been paid for without raising the gas tax and without adding a dime to the deficit. This bill will give states and local governments the certainty that they need to plan for and commit to key infrastructure projects. It will also help to strengthen our nation's transportation system by increasing transparency in the allocation of transportation dollars, streamlining the permitting and environmental review processes, and cutting red tape. Mr. President, over the past few years of Democrat control, the public has grown increasingly skeptical of Congress being able to function. When Republicans took the majority in January, we promised the American people we'd get the Senate working again, and we've been delivering on that promise. And this transportation bill is another major legislative achievement and the result of hard work by several committees who put together key provisions to spur important infrastructure investment and safety improvements. Republicans and Democrats alike got to make their voices heard in this process, and the resulting bill is stronger because of it. As chairman of the Commerce Committee, I had the opportunity to work on the commerce section of the bill. Our focus was on enhancing the safety of our nation's cars, trucks, and railroads, and the bill that we produced makes key reforms that will enhance transportation safety around the country. Over the past year, the Commerce Committee has spent a lot of time focused on motor vehicle safety efforts. Last year was a record year for auto problems, with more than 63 million vehicles recalled. Now, two of the defects that have spurred recent auto recalls, the faulty General Motors ignition switch and the defective airbag inflators from Takata, are responsible for numerous unnecessary deaths and injuries. At least 8 reported deaths in the case of Takata and more than 100 deaths in the case of General Motors. Indications point to the Takata recalls as being among the largest and most complex set of auto-related recalls in our nation's history, with more than 30 million cars affected. Given the seriousness of these recalls, when it came time to draft the highway bill, one of our priorities at the Commerce Committee was addressing auto safety issues and promoting greater consumer awareness and corporate responsibility. The Commerce section of the DRIVE Act now triples the civil penalties that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration can impose on automakers for a series of related safety violations, from a cap of $35 million to a cap of $105 million, which should provide a stronger deterrent against auto safety violations like those that occurred in the case of the faulty ignition switches at General Motors. Our portion of the bill also improves notification methods to ensure that consumers are made aware of recalls. Mr. President, in the wake of the recall over the GM ignition switch defect, the Inspector General at the Department of Transportation published a scathing report identifying serious lapses at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, the government agency responsible for overseeing safety in our nation's cars and trucks. The concerns raised included questions about the agency's ability to properly identify and investigate safety problems, a concern that is further underscored, I might add, by the circumstances surrounding the Takata recalls. In addition to targeting violations by automakers, our portion of the highway bill also addresses the lapses at the Highway Traffic Safety Administration identified in the Inspector General's report. In its typical fashion, the Obama administration claimed that NHTSA's problems could be solved by simply throwing more money at the agency. But based on expert testimony from the Inspector General, it is clear that money alone is not going to solve the problem. We need to ensure that the agency fixes what is broken before we provide a significant increase in funding authorization with taxpayer dollars. Our bill makes additional funding increases for NHTSA's vehicle safety efforts contingent on that agency's implementation of reforms called for by the Inspector General, ensuring that this agency will be in a better position to address vehicle safety problems in the future. Now, I appreciate that NHTSA's current administration and administrator is pledged to implement all of these recommendations. Mr. President, another big focus of the Commerce Committee this year has been rail safety. Nearly half of the Commerce section of the DRIVE Act is made up of a bipartisan rail safety bill put together by the Republican junior senator from Mississippi and the Democrat junior senator from New Jersey. Their work on important rail and Amtrak reforms was almost ready for a committee markup at the beginning of May, but after the tragic train derailment in Philadelphia, these two senators opted to delay the markup and then added even more safety provisions to the bill that they crafted. Their bill, which passed the committee with unanimous support from committee members of both parties, includes provisions to strengthen our nation's rail infrastructure and to smooth the way for the implementation of new safety technologies. Mr. President, our transportation infrastructure keeps our economy and our nation going. Our nation's farmers depend on our rail system to move their crops to the market. Manufacturers rely on our interstate highway system to distribute their goods to stores across the United States. And all of us depend on our nation's roads and bridges to get around every single day. For too long, transportation has been the subject of short-term legislation that leaves those responsible for building and for maintaining our nation's transportation system without the certainty and the predictability they need to keep our roads and highways thriving. I'm proud of the bill that we have on the floor before us today. I hope we can pass this legislation as soon as possible and work with the House to develop a final bill that will allow us to fund our nation's transportation priorities on a long-term basis. We can't afford, Mr. President, to continue this path that we've been on of passing short-term extensions, 33 already in the last 5 years, 5 a year, more than 5 a year, and all the uncertainty that comes with that jeopardizes jobs across this country that are related to construction of these projects, that jeopardizes the planning and engineering and design work that our departments of transportation across the country do, and that puts at risk all the transportation infrastructure that moves the freight, that moves the people across this country on which our economy depends. And so I say, as a member who represents a rural state from South Dakota where we have 77,000 square miles, home to 800,000 square people, we depend heavily to get to and from our destinations on roads and bridges. We have people who drive long distances to work. We have people who come into our state every single year. This time of the year, we'll have 1 million or so people descend upon a little town in western South Dakota called Sturgis, which will be the place where the annual motorcycle rally is hosted. We have people who come by the thousands to our state every single year to visit the Black Hills and Mount Rushmore. We depend upon a good, viable, robust transportation system. And as I mentioned earlier, we are an agricultural economy that drives the jobs in our state, that keeps our main streets going, and that agricultural economy depends upon getting those things that we raise and grow to the marketplace. And that means good highways, railroads, ports, all the things that are essential to make sure that our agricultural producers can get the things that they raise and grow to the places, to the destinations they need to get them to. So this is really important work that we're doing. Again, I thank the senator from Oklahoma for his hard work. And I certainly hope that if we can push this across the finish line here soon, that we will be able to present it to the House of Representatives, where notwithstanding the statements that have been made there, perhaps they could look at this body of work and think, like we do, that this gives us an opportunity to put something on the books, a long-term, the longest-term bill that we've had literally now in 10 years, and do something that will be really important for our economy and for jobs. Mr. President, I yield the floor.